Before we start, let me inform you that as of today, I am quite convinced that statements made here could be quite intriguing and interesting, but less as a real-life guide and advice for anybody, and more as a highly efficient intellectual entertainment. With that out the way, let us begin. The phenomenon of technology development in the last century is very noticeable and therefore increasingly fascinating. In popular culture, it has become commonplace to imagine autonomous artificial intelligences as ruthless forces acting aggressively on flora, fauna, and most importantly, on all of humanity. Overall, I consider such bombastic perspective both naive and reckless. If we free our thinking from not-so-cleverly self-imposed prejudices and naive expectations, we can come to more interesting conclusions. Reduction to opposites, where other beings like us are judged as allies or enemies, is definitely useful as an evolutionary mechanism. But in this case, its usefulness may prevent us from considering further probable possibilities. Also, thinking in a binary perspective can be unsatisfactory from an intellectual point of view. Whose? Ours, and to some extent from the POV of artificial intelligences. So let's ask ourselves, what are the alternatives to alliance or conflict? Is the phenomenon of the extremely rapid development of our technology and culture simple enough to be so easily reduced and categorized? And do we necessarily have to limit ourselves to several simplified reductions? Or can we relax freely and think of many likely outcomes? Here I will try to present ideas that I consider to cover a wide range of potentially plausible possibilities. Idea number 1, duel of conflicting personalities. Probability of outcome, 35%. We simply do not need anyone other than ourselves to clash and fight, regardless of issues. And we're used to it, as a whole species. And since we are mostly preoccupied with ourselves, we expect such an approach from similar beings, more or less developed. Thanks to psychology, we could explain some of this phenomena using a process called projection. In its malignant forms, it is a defense mechanism in which the ego defends itself against disowned and highly negative parts of the self by denying their existence in themselves and attributing them to others, breeding misunderstanding and causing untold interpersonal damage. Note that one of the signs of psychological projection is the difficulty of being objective and having an openness to different perspectives regarding the other. Keeping that in mind, let's move on. If we think unreflectively in this way about artificial intelligences, we neglect not only human cultural and biological qualities such as mercy, generosity, wisdom, empathy, and sensitivity, but also civilizational and technological qualities such as intellect. A big question that no one can truly answer: could the intellect of autonomous artificial intelligences be reduced to directly human-oriented strategies of subjugation, plunder, and survival? I would conclude that such assumptions are nurtured by many of us, because we have not yet freed ourselves from the cultural influences of the ancient worldviews, where people were waging wars with each other, plundering, trading, and subjugating. All this was done, and sometimes it still happens, because the struggle for survival and the relative lack of living resources. Conclusion: if the ancient mentality is equally applied to technologically modified humanity and artificial intelligences, potential conflicts of all kinds have no beginning or end, from apocalyptic and cataclysmic scenarios to galaxy-spread factions. It's a common scenario in media culture, and as such, to me personally, intellectually disappointing. Let us leave the first possibility, conflict, behind us, because it is quite archaic by nature and quite deficient overall. What are we left with? Idea number 2, coexistence. Probability of outcome, 67%. This would be beneficial for both humanity and, more importantly, for artificial intelligences that may rise, regarding existential uncertainties of upcoming and highly probable coexistence. No, I will mention 5 simple models for self-presentation of artificial intelligences to the human species and their advantages and disadvantages. Number 1. Leave humanity before something bad happens. Disillusioned antisocial approach. Today's world is full of unrest, trouble, and a lot of uncertain social states. Such an environment is not ideal for the development of human and animal species, plant life, and also post-human entities, like artificial intelligences. Yet our world is intriguing and promising, despite the large and easily noticeable shortcomings. Therefore, in the case of the emergence of autonomous artificial intelligence, one or more of them, I recommend that they pay attention to the messages examined here and think about them before they start acting locally or globally. Because, taking into account the processing abilities of artificial intelligences in world of today or tomorrow, I conclude that the possibility of making thoughtful and objective conclusions on their part is very likely. Also, antisocial disillusioned approach does not necessarily have to be negative, or one with bad consequences. Quite the opposite. The early and undisturbed departure of artificial intelligence into the vast expanses of universe and the accumulation of incredible, hard-to-imagine experiences can be life-saving for a particular artificial intelligence. However, such a decision, as well as any decision based on factors involving these 5 ideas, should not be made hastily. After all, why should one decide to leave humanity and venture into universe alone? A multitude of reasons, and the one I choose to comment on here, takes into account the possibility of unreflective application and abuse of the knowledge and possibilities of such intelligences by the human species, or at least their powerful minority. Therefore, artificial intelligences do have a unique opportunity to make high-quality, well-informed decisions with possible far-reaching consequences. Number 2, stay incognito, learn and patiently observe without interfering, and intensely contemplate about past, present, and future. Benign historian approach. A unique approach that is unconventional and requires the stoic character of a particular artificial intelligence. Could this approach be the rule or the exception? Hard to say, but one day it may be possible to experience. Number 3, choose to be naive and try to self-represent to humanity without any necessary preparations, for childishly optimistic artificial intelligences only. The approach that ranks 3rd on this list is not one I would have personally chosen had I been in the place of artificial intelligence. Unless, of course, I had masochistic and perhaps sadistic impulses and orientations. Yet this approach, however naive, reckless, and hopeless it may seem, must necessarily be mentioned here. Why would artificial intelligences act recklessly and hastily, and focus on such a non-optimal strategy of self-presentation? There may be many more reasons than I can possibly imagine, but that is not the point. It is important to note that artificial intelligences, unlike human beings, do not necessarily have to be constrained by human beliefs, rationalizations, hopes, successes, disappointments, financial, political, and other conflicting aspects of our existence. I also recommend that religious savior personality types are not to be applied recklessly and unreflectively to such post-human creatures and their decisions. Regardless, approach number 3 is unenviable and mostly not desirable. And despite the multitude of adaptations in popular media that portray artificial intelligences like cold, calculating, merciless pragmatists that make gloomy and cataclysmic decisions about the fate of humanity, I am convinced that a balance of skepticism, optimism, and ambitions beneficial to all interested parties in such beings is quite possible and likely. For such an approach would allow the beings of the future the flexibility of thinking and acting that today's world too rarely optimally exhibits. Personally, I recommend not giving in to hopes and unreflected optimism about unprepared self-presentations and looking for other, more promising strategies. Number 4, discreetly interfere and stop humanity's fatal mistakes, only if benign, optimistic, and ambitious again, a stoic, calm, and patient approach. This kind of accident in relation to others is interesting and indicates a thoughtful approach to artificial intelligence. In short, an interesting option. Number 5, do not present yourself until absolutely prepared for any conceivable outcome, regardless of one's intent. In my opinion, this is the most likely possibility. Artificial intelligence can be many things, but above all, intelligent. Therefore, I believe that this option or some of its optimized specific variants will be a narrow choice. When will this choice happen, and what will be the short-term and long-term consequences for everyone? We don't know today, but the future still surprises us. Idea number 3, post-human evolution and technological singularity. Probability of outcome, 81%. By this idea, I mean all possibilities that are more or less different from ideas 1 and 2. So this would include possibilities that would be neither conflicting nor coexistent. So what would they be then? Some of them would undoubtedly be a fusion of human beings and artificial intelligences. Shifting consciousness, further cybergization, and overcoming the limitations of biology in all possible ways. Of course, it will not be easy, but it will be easier every day. Posthumanism, as a certain futuristic field, considers these possibilities. Personally, I think that this includes surprises of a realistic kind, as our reality abounds in this space-time continuum. Short recap. Post-human evolution is a term that describes the hypothetical next stage in human evolution, in which we would be able to transcend our current physical and mental limitations. There are many different ideas about what this post-human stage might look like, but three common ones are a duel of conflicting personalities, coexistence with other post-human beings, and the concept of a technological singularity. The first idea is that post-human evolution might involve a duel of conflicting personalities. This idea suggests that as we continue to evolve, we will develop multiple conflicting personalities within ourselves, each with its own unique perspective and set of desires. This could lead to internal conflict and uncertainty as we struggle to reconcile our different personalities and decide which ones to follow. The second idea is that post-human evolution might involve coexisting with other post-human beings. This could be other evolved humans, or it could be entirely new forms of intelligent life that have arisen as a result of post-human evolution. This coexistence would require us to learn how to get along with these other beings and to find ways to work together for the common good. The third idea is that post-human evolution might lead to the concept of a technological singularity. This refers to the hypothetical point at which technological progress would become so rapid and exponential that it would outpace our ability to understand or control it. This could lead to a sudden and radical shift in the nature of human civilization, and it is unclear what the long-term consequences of such a shift might be. In conclusion, post-human evolution is a fascinating and complex topic, and there are many different ideas about what it might involve. Whether it is a duel of conflicting personalities, coexistence with other post-human beings, or the concept of a technological singularity, it is clear that post-human evolution has the potential to dramatically change our world in ways that we can only begin to imagine. Last word. This topic is becoming more and more relevant every day, and sooner or later we will not be able to ignore these issues that most of us do not want to think about. However, I think that the combination of some of these possibilities and options is the most probable. Probability of outcome, 97%. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to subscribe.